Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to give it about a minute or so to see if anybody else trickles in, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot of content to cover today. I'm just going to introduce myself and we'll get going. So my name's Danae Gailey. I am a care manager here with BDDS. So some of you probably recognize my name, not my face. This part is part 2 of our KW implementation for traditional service coordinators. Today we're going to go over the new ISPs, costing sheets, questionnaires. So kind of some housekeeping here. We will, can you flip to the next slide, Andrea? We're going to pause periodically throughout the training for questions. And then you can type a question into the chat box at any time. Make sure it's the chat box to all panelists or to everyone. Do we have the option for everyone on there? I see a question regarding that. We'll look into that. If you can't select everyone, please select all panelists. If you select all attendees or just hosts, there is a chance that we will miss it. And also, if you are in the Q&A chat box, there is a good chance we'll miss it there as well. So make sure that we either have, if you have the option to select everyone, go ahead and select that. If not, go ahead and select to all panelists. We will give opportunities for you to raise your hand and ask questions verbally throughout the training. So if that's easier for you, there are some spots to pause to do that. A copy and recording of the presentation is going to be made available after the training on the My Choice Matters website. That part 1 has already been recorded and is available there too. And some of you, or most of you, should have received the slides and draft ISP documents. They were sent out prior to the presentation today. If you did not receive them, they will be posted on the My Choice Matters website. So this presentation today is gonna be a little bit different. I'm gonna present the first half, and then we have Andrea Hatch. She's gonna present the second half, including the costing pages and all that fun stuff. All right, so we're gonna jump into the plan review or addendum review guidelines first here. And this is just how care managers are going to review the plan. So we review the plan or addendum and supporting documentation, and we approve when all the following conditions are met. So we make sure that all the documentation is completed accurately, the participant qualifies for all the services on the plan, the services are within any established limits. Those established limits will be posted in an external manual for everybody to review. Services on the plan address participant needs and service preferences. The plan maintains participant rights and addresses risks with the least restrictive methods. And then we will make sure that the plan is either within the advisory budget, and that advisory budget is that new budget from the new resource allocation tool from Liberty. with the assigned budget, and then that is the ARP budget similar to the KW now. And we just want to ensure that that meets all the prior authorization requirements, which we'll go over in the next slide. Or if it exceeds the assigned budget, that it will be accompanied with a budget modification request with the documentation that establishes any of those requested services are to address their health or safety need. So that is very similar to the health and safety risk exception reviews that we do now. So care managers will reach out to plan developers to resolve any issues causing the plan not to meet those requirements. And then if those cannot get resolved, the plan will be denied or partially denied. So the prior authorization requirement. So this is IDAPA 16.3.10.507. And we have to review this for every plan and make sure all the services fall within this. The purpose of adult developmental disability services prior authorization is to assure the provision of the right care in the right place at the right price and with the right outcomes in order to enhance health, safety, and to promote participants' rights, self-determination, and independence. Prior authorization involves the assessment of the need for services, development of a budget, development of a plan of services, prior approval of services, and a quality improvement program. Services are reimbursable if they are identified on the authorized plan of service and are consistent with the purpose and rule for prior authorization, as well as rules for the specific service. So we, regardless of what budget it falls into or out of, we need to make sure that it meets those prior authorization requirements. The next slide goes over the submission timelines. So very similar to what we do now, initial plans are due 30 days before the requested start date. Annual, prorated, or mid-year plans are due 45 days prior to the requested start date. So kind of the new addition there is the mid-year plans. In circumstances where we need to expedite things or they need the services quicker than the 30 or the 45 days, plan developers can reach out to the assigned care manager and request that we start those sooner. We can also look into extensions of the previous plan and do those if needed. Late plan notices will be sent out when a plan is not received within the 1 week of the plan's due date, and that's listed on the eligibility notice. Some caveats to that is we will not send them if the delays it's late due to late eligibility, or the plan developers reached out to the care manager and communicated what's going on there. The next section is on incomplete plans. So I just want to give a little caveat here. We will not, during implementation, be sending out incompletes. We'll be sending our corrections emails. Care managers have been asked, however, to CC QA when we send out those correction emails. So, and that's not for a plan of corrections or anything like that. That's simply to identify any gaps in the process, trends, any training needs. So the incompletes, so once implementation is done and we're rolling, these are the things listed here that we would send incompletes for. I'm not going to go over the list in too much detail. They're basic things. So, so just incorrect dates or missing plan dates. The costing page doesn't correlate with the actual ISP. The ISP header information is incorrect, and that's kind of important. You'll see when we get into the plan, when you fill out that ISP header, it's going to repeat on every page of the plan. So if you type in a Medicaid ID wrong or a participant name wrong, that would be wrong on every page of the plan. So you guys should be able to review this list. It will be on the PowerPoint that is listed on the My Choice Matters website. And so you'll have access to that and review it more in detail. So before we jump into the actual ISP, I wanted to stop and see if there's any questions.
I'm just seeing one question, and I'm not sure that I have the answer for that. Michael will be on the call here in a little while, and we can maybe defer that question to him.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing it. So the question is, when will the rules be available for providers to begin writing policies and procedures? And yeah, I don't have the answer to that either. So hopefully when Michael jumps on, he may have that answer. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Is anybody else? All right, perfect. So when we get into these ISP slides, it's kind of set up in a way that the first slide has detailed instructions, and then the following slide has the examples. So I'm not going to read the instructions in detail from these slides. Like I said, these will be available for you to use as a resource. There's going to be a lot of times we're just going to jump to that example so we can correlate the two versus repeating the information each slide. So the basic ISP is set up into, there's about 4 categories on the basic ISP. The first one is the personal and plan developer information. And this is very basic demographic information. So this is the header that we were talking about. And in the ISP instructions in the manual, it'll tell you how to click into the header to edit that. And this is where we really need to focus that information is correct, because it will repeat on every page. And then the other stuff is basic information, just their address, guardian information if applicable, and then the plan developer, plan monitor information. And we just ask that we have all that completed, and there's no gaps there. And we're going to be looking and verifying that guardian information and making sure if there's a guardian listed, we have guardianship docs or what we need for that. So the second category of the ISP is the person-centered planning, and there's some subcategories in this section. So Andrea, if you want to jump to the example here. So the subsection is the participant's strengths, goals, and preferences. So it's the expectation that this information will be discussed during the PCP meeting and reflect the maximum possible involvement by the participant in the PCP process. So the first question in the participant strengths, goals, and preferences are what are their strengths? And so we ask that you list the participant's strengths identified by the participant and anybody in that PCP team, and then what services are important to the participant. So any services that are important to them, we ask that you list there, and just make note that this would be even if they're not accessing that service. So any services, and then we ask that you put their preferred providers and delivery preferences there. So for example, certified family home is important to this person, and that's with Mary Jones, his preferred provider, developmental therapy and community hub with ABCDDA, and he prefers to have 2 days in center and 3 days in the community. What did the participants identify as their personal goals and desired outcomes? So we ask that you discuss with the participant and their team and list sorry, I'm skipping a spot. We ask that you ask the participant what their personal goals are and their desired outcomes and list them here. So if for some reason the participant does not want to disclose personal goals, they refuse them, or they're not able to, we just ask that you have that indicated in this section. So so-and-so refused to answer this, so-and-so is nonverbal and was unable to answer this. Just make sure that you have that detail listed there. And the next section is what activities will assist them in achieving their desired goals and outcomes, and who will help them complete these activities. So this would be also a discussion with the participant and the team to list the activities and who's going to help them complete them. So like in this example, the service coordinator is going to link John to IDVR because he wants to find a job this year. The guardian's going to help out with budgeting to see what he needs to do to attend his BSU football game. So we ask that you list those there. We want to make note that this should be very participant specific, more than just a generic statement that says all goals by providers will help them with the personal goals. So, and then the next question is where do they choose to live or receive services? So we ask you to list their chosen living situation, and that is also if it's not where they are currently residing. So if John wanted to live with his guardian, but he was currently in a certified family home, it would say here that John would like to live with his guardian. In this situation, he's choosing to live with a certified family home, non-family Mary Jones. And then we ask what alternative service setting options were considered. So anything else that was discussed, if it was discussed that, like this one, he considered living with his guardian, but determined they have a better relationship now that he lives in a different spot. He wants to learn more about supported living. Any of those things would be listed there. So the next part of the person-centered planning section is the risk factors section. This also should be discussed in the person-centered planning meeting, and it should reflect the maximum possible involvement by the participant. So the risk factors here, there's some qualities that are listed. This is from the home and community-based qualities in IDAPA. So they have to exhibit the following qualities: integration and access, where services and supports are provided. Selection of setting is based on the participant's need and preferences, ensuring the participant's rights to privacy, dignity, respect, and freedom from coercion and unauthorized restraint are honored. Autonomy and independence of participant choices is optimized rather than regimented, and choices about services and supports providing in the setting are promoted. So this next section, our risk factor section, would need to address any risk that any of these qualities would pose to them and how that's being mitigated. It also needs to address any general risk. So the section is set up in two columns. So what risk factors are there to the participant or people around them. So this is where any of those risks would need to be listed on the left-hand side. And then any backup plan strategies, anything that's in place to mitigate that risk would need to be on the right-hand side with the corresponding risks. So for example, John here, he has the risk of exploitation by others in the community. And then the measures we have in place to help him out with that is the developmental therapy will work on safety skill goals in the community. Community hub will provide support while interacting with others, and just all those things that will help him with those. So there's a couple examples of some risks there. And when you're doing this, there is instructions in the ISP instructions that if there are more risks, then there are fields that you have here, how to add some lines in there so you can add those risks. All right, so the next section is the participant rights. This also should be discussed in the meeting and reflect the maximum possible involvement by the participant. So this is from the provider-owned or controlled setting qualities in IDAPA. So provider-owned or controlled settings, including certified family homes that provide service to HCBS participants, they have to support the following rights. So written agreement, so that's a lease or residential agreement for each HCBS participant. Right to privacy, including lockable doors and choice of roommates. Right to choose decor and furniture. Right to control their own schedules and activities. Access to food. Visitors, including anyone at any time, and physically accessible. So if there are any exceptions to these setting requirements that you can't meet for a health or safety reason, then the participant rights section of the ISP is going to be needed to be filled out. Andrea, do you want to pop to the example on that? So this is how the participants' rights sections appears. If none of those rights are being restricted, then you're okay to mark no and move on to the next section of the ISP. If any of those rights are being restricted, then you'll have to mark yes, and then you'll have to fill out the following sections. So the first section is, are any of the rights being restricted? So that's the yes, and then describe the right being restricted and why. And so what assessed needs are being addressed by the restriction? So in here, we ask that you describe which rights being restricted, why, and what assessed need is being addressed by that. So the example here is that John needs to get approval from a certified family home provider to have visitors after 10 or before 8 a.m. So that the right would be the visitors, anyone at any time. John has made unsafe decisions in the past when inviting strangers from the internet into his home, potentially putting himself, his providers, roommates at risk, and he needs assistance to make those decisions. The next one is provided clear description of the intervention that's being used, assuring that the support will cause no harm. So the department does not authorize any restriction that causes harm. So if you're putting a statement in here, you are assuring that this is causing no harm to the participant. So we ask that you describe that intervention. So this one gives a little bit more detail. So the certified family home is going to discuss with John any potential visitors during those hours to decide if the person's a stranger who presents a potential risk, or is a visitor that the certified family home and John both agree is not a threat to anyone. If the visitor presents a potential risk, the certified family home won't allow the visitor to enter the home during those hours, and they'll redirect him to have the visit during waking hours. List less intrusive methods previously implemented that were unsuccessful in addressing the needs. And so this is a requirement that you have attempted less intrusive methods. So in this example, there were just discussions with John to make safe choices, but he continued to invite strangers from the internet. How will the provider regularly collect data and measure the ongoing effectiveness of the restriction? So this is also a requirement that data is collected on the restriction and that we're going to measure ongoing effectiveness. And so, for example, in this one, it's the certified family home is going to document any occurrences where John has invited a visitor to the home during sleeping hours and if they were determined to be a potential threat or a safe visitor. And then how often is the PCP team going to conduct reviews to determine if the restriction is still necessary? Transition plan can be developed or if the restriction can be terminated. And so we're just looking for a frequency of how often that is going to happen, because when we're doing those restrictions, it is a requirement that those PCP team conducts reviews of that. So do we have any questions prior to jumping into the supports and services portion of the plan? I see one that says, will we be allowed to continue to obtain verbal consent for plans like we do now? I think that's a COVID exception. So I do believe unless the rules are changing on that, I do believe when COVID goes away, that will probably go away. Do you have anything to add to that, Andrea?
No, I don't have anything to add to that. I think that that's a COVID exception. And so when those COVID exceptions end, we'll have to see what the decision is at that point. But as of right now, with those COVID exceptions in place, those are not changing.
Okay, perfect. Is there a DHW process to resolve disagreements amongst members of the PCP team with the final contents of the plan? I do believe it is the responsibility of the service coordinator to do conflict resolution if any of those happen. Ultimately, I think it's participant choice, participant guardian choice, and then each provider, and we'll get further into that, every provider has to sign off on what services they're providing. So that's a little different than the previous ISP. We will be required to have provider signatures. So what will happen if approved measures to minimize risks don't work? I think that's probably a QA question. What do you think, Andrea?
I agree. I also would maybe add to that in the risk mitigation, we're looking to mitigate risk. Inherently, there are risks to everyday life, and there are risks to our participants. And I think what we're looking for here is that efforts are being made to mitigate those risks. Not necessarily that all risks will disappear, but that they are being mitigated in the best way possible while still allowing for participant choice and participant rights. Does Alina have anything she'd like to add?
I just want to jump in and say, and I want to thank both Andrea and Danae for taking on some of these questions. Unfortunately, on this training, we do not have a member of the KW core team available, so a member of the leadership team on the call at this time. And so I think a number of these questions, while very good questions, are those that will need to be brought back to that core team. Luckily, all questions that are shared with all panelists are being cataloged and will make their way back to the team for further review and further conversation. So I think feel free to continue identifying those sorts of questions and we'll get those circled back. That with regard to the questions that we can answer here in live time, it probably is more limited to the forms themselves versus the underlying policy decisions, just because of the trainers we have available with us here today. So just to note that, and thank you ladies for doing a good job on trying to answer some of those questions, but I know that your area of expertise is really on the forms themselves, and I know there's quite a bit left to go for that. So while we're happy to keep taking some of those questions, by and large, we'll probably just hold them to respond to at a later time. We've got some other representatives on a training, so thanks.
Okay, perfect. And then we do have one more question. I think one part of it we could probably answer, the other part may need to be tabled. So what will be the turnaround to authorize amendments to the plan that needs to be immediately implemented? So the typical standard turnaround time for addendums is still going to be the 15 days prior to the start date. But if something needs to be expedited, you can reach out to your care manager and we can work out expediting something. And then also if there's like a service mix change, if we need to expedite something, we can shoot some emails to Liberty and see, but those will take some more time. So, all right, so moving on, the service and support section. The first section of the services and supports is the service coordinator section. So we're gonna jump to that example. So the first line is just the provider. The provider will be listed there, just who's providing that service coordination, and then we ask that you fill out the frequency of contact, mode of contact, so how that contact's going to happen. You can list multiple modes if that's how you work, and the person and entity to contact. So like in this example, John and his guardian are the people to contact here. It is the responsibility of the service coordinator to ensure there's no duplication of services. So we do ask that you mark that you have ensured that. And you just review all the services, whether those be paid services, non-paid services, natural not paid, not DD services as well. So, and then have you received all the applicable provider status reviews? If that is marked no, we ask that you provide an explanation why that didn't happen. What participant-specific goals will be addressed during the plan year? So these are tasks that you have specifically worked on with this participant, that you've agreed to work on with this participant. We're not looking for the per IDAPA quote here. We're looking for what have you discussed in this PCP meeting that we're going to work on for that person directly. And then what should the participant, family, and provider do in an emergency when the service coordinator is not available? So this is what the team should do in an emergency and how the service coordinator is going to coordinate the services once available after the emergency. So we just want to make sure that that little blurb is in there, that what the service coordinator is going to do once the emergency is over as well. The next section of the services and supports, there's going to be 3 sections: DD paid services, non-DD paid services, and natural unpaid supports. We do ask that each section has these completed. So in the DD paid services, you're going to list on the left-hand side what services there, and then the provider who's going to be providing that service. And so these should correlate with what's on the costing sheet because we're asking these to be paid for by their BDDS budget. Non-DD paid services, so what the service that's being provided, the provider, and then how often it happens. We're asking for the frequency on these because we wouldn't know because this is not something on the cost sheet. So for example, like this one's an occupational therapy, the primary care physician, any of those things that are paid but are not paid out of their developmental disabilities budget. And the last one are the natural unpaid support. So whoever is not being paid, but they're still providing support there. So what service they're providing to them, the provider, and how often that's happening. So this example just shows the guardian is there, they're there as needed, their church is there for them, and that lists the church's name, and then how often they're available. All right. So that sums up the services and supports. So now we're going to jump into the main ISP signature page. So the first signature is the informed consent signature. So this has to be signed by the participant, and if there's a guardian, they'll need to sign it as well if applicable. So this just indicates that the participant made choices on the services and providers, the plan meets the needs and addresses health and safety, and that changes won't be made to the plan without the participant and guardian consent. The next one is the informed choice section. Very similar to the DD initials that we get now. This needs to be signed by the participant and the guardian if applicable, and it indicates that the participant is choosing to receive DD waiver services instead of care in an ICFID, and they can choose ICFID admission at any time. The plan developer signature. So this is signed off by the plan developer, and they're indicating that the plan developer provided information, supports maximize their ability to make informed choices regarding services and providers. The plan meets the needs, addresses health and safety, and reflects the participants' choices. And the plan developer will monitor the plan and review services to ensure they are delivered according to the plan and in accordance with HCBS setting quality requirements. So that is the main ISP signature page. So the next portion we're going to jump into is questionnaires. Were there any other questions prior to let's see, I see a couple in here. I see are natural supports required? So if there are any natural supports, yes, they are required to be on the plan. I know there are some situations where somebody may not have natural supports, but if there are any natural supports that they're receiving, they are required to be on the plan. So care managers they'll review all the documentation we get from Liberty and everybody, and if we're seeing that there's no natural supports, but it's indicated throughout their stuff, we will ask for those to be added. Why does it say plan monitor versus plan developer? I think there's some requirements in IDAPA in the HCBS rules that indicate that there needs to be a plan monitor. So the service coordinator would act as the plan monitor, and the person who develops the plan is the plan developer. So there are a couple different terminology there. So if you develop the plan, you're the plan developer. If you're the service coordinator, you're required to monitor the plan. So you would be referred to as a plan monitor. Jennifer Adams asked, do non-waiver participants complete the informed choice on the signature page? So the informed choice is not required for DD state plan participants because they are not choosing waiver services at that point, and so they wouldn't be able to choose ICFID admission at any time. So that's a great question. Anybody seeing anything else? All right, perfect. So now we're jumping into the questionnaires. So in addition to the main ISP, there are a series of questionnaires to be submitted for certain services. So the next slide shows us.
And Danae, before you move forward, there was one question that came through the Q&A that I want to make sure was addressed. Can a plan developer and a plan monitor be the same?
Absolutely. The plan developer and a plan monitor can be the same person, and the majority of the time that's what we see. But there are situations where that plan developer and plan monitor are different people. All right, Andrea, can you flip to the next slide? Is it delaying? All right, so this is the list of services that require a questionnaire to be submitted. So anytime the services is listed on a plan or an addendum, the corresponding questionnaire would need to be filled out and submitted with that plan or addendum. So we have certified family home questionnaire, supported living questionnaire, developmental therapy questionnaire, adult day health, pre-vocational services, career planning, supported employment, nursing services, behavioral consultation, and community hub. So all questionnaires have the same. Do you want to jump to the next slide, Andrea? So all questionnaires have the same basic header information. They're going to ask for the header, so the participant's name, Medicaid ID, plan start and end date, the provider name. We do ask if it's the provider name as it's listed in Gainwell, because these will help our prior authorization staff make sure that they're PAing the correct provider. And then it does have a provider representative name on there, so printed out the first and last name of somebody authorized for the agency, and then the authorized representative signature, and then the date. So there's a slide for each questionnaire specifically. We'll go over them. The first one is certified family home. So on the certified family home slide, we're asking if they wish to access alone time. If you mark yes, then you'd have to answer those alone time questions following. If you mark no, you can skip those. So the alone time we ask for, the weekly amount of alone time hours, and then the maximum increment of time alone. So in this example, he can be alone for 14 hours per week. but that's only in 2-hour increments. So meaning he probably is not safe for 14 hours all at once, but he is safe for, 2 hours a day or 2 hours at a time. And then when and where the alone time will occur. So like in this example, it's at home during the daytime hours only. So, and does the PCP team agree the participant can follow an alone time safety plan and minimize any health or safety risks associated with alone time? So we ask you to mark yes or no on there. If you mark no, we may question like kind of what's going on there, and if it's not safe, why is it being provided, is it his choice, and how we're mitigating any risk, and if those risks are put up in the risk factor section. And then we ask you list the informal goals in the left-hand column, and then any formal goals. There is a situation with certified family homes where those formal goals may be to be determined, and that's on the initial submission of this, because we're still waiting on RISE to create those implementation plans and have that meeting and discuss those goals. And then there's the provider signature section where we ask for the authorized rep and the signature and date. The next questionnaire is for supported living. So the question here is, what supported living option has the participant chosen? And it lists all of the levels and the per diems, if we are listed there, or if they're choosing per unit rates, you would fill out the second section of that says the average requested weekly group hours, average requested weekly individual hours, and then the average requested 2-on-1 hours. And we ask that you fill those out. And then the informal goals on the left-hand side. So what will they be working on informally? And then the formal goals on the right-hand side. This is a little different than certified family home. We do ask that those formal goals be filled out because they should be decided in that PCP team meeting, and then the supported living agency will have the 14 days to create the appropriate implementation plans based off those formal goals. And then the provider signature is listed here. The next one is for developmental therapy. So we ask that you mark that it's been referred by a physician. So we're not asking for that referral at this time. We're asking that the plan developer and the provider check that it has been referred. So if you mark yes here, you're confirming that you've got a referral from a physician to provide that service. If this is marked no, we wouldn't be able to approve developmental therapy on the plan. And then how many hours of center and community are listed here. So we just asked you put the frequency or how many hours per week that they'll be receiving that. And much like the other ones, you list the informal goals on the left and any formal goals on the right. The next one is adult day health. So this one is pretty straight to the point. How many hours of adult day health will they receive each week? And we have you list any informal goals, but because adult day health does not have any formal goals, we would just leave that formal goals section blank and then have the provider representative sign and date. Pre-vocational services. All right, so this one asks how many hours of individual pre-vocational services will they receive weekly and how many group hours. So just listed the individual and group hours there in that first section. And have they previously accessed pre-vocational services, yes or no, and then for how long? Because this is a service that is limited to 520 hours total, so we're going to be looking at that. And then informal goals listed and formal goals listed, and a signature. The next section is career planning. So this is the number of hours they plan on they plan on to receive of career planning per week. And so just how many hours there, informal goals, and then formal goals listed. The next one is supported employment. So this one, we asked how many hours they'll receive weekly, and we asked that we mark that this is either that we mark that it's a competitive work in an integrated setting. This is a requirement per IDAPA that supported employment is for competitive work in an integrated setting. So we're asking that people verify that that's happening. If it was marked no, we wouldn't be able to authorize those supported employment services. So care managers will take a look at that. It's just like the other ones, informal goals on the left and then those formal goals on the right. Nursing services. So similar to developmental therapy, we're going to be asked if they've been referred to by a physician. So this, we ask the plan developer and the provider verify that these services have been referred to by a physician. It is a requirement. So if this marked no, we wouldn't be able to authorize that service. If it's marked yes, then great. And then it breaks down nursing by nursing oversight by RN, LPN, skilled nursing by RN and LPN, and how often that's going to happen. And so that's going to be how many units by how much frequency. So we know nursing can be monthly, yearly, every other month. So just make sure that that's listed there. And then because nursing doesn't have formal goals, we just ask that the informal goals be filled out on this. All right, the next one is behavioral consultation and crisis management. How many hours are going to be provided by emergency intervention technician, how many hours are going to be provided by a QIDP or clinician, and how many hours are provided by a psychiatrist per week. And so we ask that you list those hours there. And this is similar, there is no formal goals on this, so we would just ask you to list informal goals and then provide your signature. Community habilitation. So this one breaks it down to how many hours of one-on-one, 1-to-2, 1-to-3, or 2-to-1 the participant's going to receive. And this is going to be the number of hours per week. We have you list that there. Community habilitation does not have formal goals either, so we just ask you list the informal goals and what they'll be doing during that time. So that is the end of our questionnaires. What questions do we have for those? Sorry, I'm trying to flip through here. So I have this question, would you list dentist, vision doctor, or hearing doctor under the non-DD paid service section as well? And the answer to that question is yes. We are required to have any services that they receive listed on the plan. The plan should reflect their entire service selection, whether it's paid by DD or paid in another way or natural. Will electronic signatures by providers be accepted on the questionnaire? Sorry, that was my workflow. I think we're going to follow our same electronic signature policy that we have now. It is posted on the DHW website. So does anybody have anything else to add to that? I do believe we still accept those. Okay. 520 hours in total or for the plan year. And so I think that's going back to the limitation on pre-vocational services, and that is in total. Okay. So any other questions before we jump into the costing page? Okay, perfect. I'll turn it over to Andrea.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into the costing page. And go ahead and if you have questions that come up as we're going through this, feel free to throw those into the chat. I am going to go through this, try to get through the costing page, and then we'll open it up for questions. And look and see what questions have come into the chat as well. So the costing page is a Microsoft Excel worksheet. We do have it locked to protect all of the formulas that are in the worksheet. There are a lot of formulas in the worksheet, and they're going to automatically calculate a lot of the information that we need. They're going to do some things like calculate the plan length based on the dates that are entered in. The budgets based on the selected service mix and level are going to automatically populate into the cost sheet, and that will include automatically prorating based on the plan dates for prorated and mid-year plans. The worksheet will also calculate all of the budget category and plan totals, and then also a fiscal plan summary of information that I'll show you an example of further on. There's a couple of other features in the costing sheet as well. When selecting services for the cost sheet, there is a drop-down menu in one of the columns that has the services, and the worksheet will automatically put in the correct procedure codes, and it will automatically put in the rates for all services that have a set rate. There will also be some alerts that will pop up on the costing sheet if a plan is over budget as well. There are two separate costing pages. There's a separate one for supported living level M and B plans only, and that is just due to some different procedures for how budgets can be used for those service mixes or service levels. And so I'm going to do a little bit like Danae did on this and skip forward to some examples, because I do think it's easier to show some of that on the actual example, but these are here for you on the slide decks. This information will also be included in the manual in detail as well, so you're not expected to remember this. All of this information will be available. So I'm going to go ahead and skip to the example for the costing page header and just a view of kind of what that's going to look like. So the costing page header is going to start with just some basic information. It's going to have the adult's name where you'll type that in, the adult's Medicaid ID number, the plan developer's name, and then for service mix and level, there will be a drop-down menu. So the plan developer will select whatever service mix or level is on the participant's eligibility. And then over in the right-hand side, we have the plan start date and the plan end date. Once the plan start date and the plan end date have been entered, the worksheet will automatically calculate the number of months in a plan. So in this example, this is a regular full one-year plan. So there are 12 months. And then where it says prorated plan, it will say no, because this is a full year plan. For plans that are prorated or maybe a mid-year plan where it's not a full 12 months, it will state the number of months in the plan, and then under prorated plan, it will say yes. And once all of this information in the header has been entered, the budget amounts will automatically populate over the rest of the costing sheet. So you can see in these areas outlined in red, the budget for this first section, plan development and service coordination, will automatically fill in along with the amount remaining, which, because we don't have any services, it's going to be the full amount. And the same with the residential budget and the discretionary budget. And again, these will automatically prorate as well if it is a prorated plan. So next we'll talk about how to enter services into the costing sheet. The first column, and I will show you on the example here in a minute, but the services will be available in a drop-down menu, and only the services that are available for that section will show up in that section. So for example, in the plan development and service coordination supports, only plan development and service coordination will be available. The procedure code will automatically populate. The plan developer will need to type in the provider name, the start date and the end date for the service, the number of units being requested, and the frequency. All of this is very similar to how those are entered into our current cost sheet. The rate will automatically populate for services with a fixed rate. And this is one area, because we do have some services like specialized medical equipment, for example, that are manually priced. That is one section that we cannot lock. So it's going to be important for plan developers to watch those rates and make sure that they are entered in correctly. If for some reason something gets deleted or isn't there, they will be able to manually type in that rate. And then the annual cost and annual units will automatically populate. So we'll move over to examples of each section. This first section is the planning support section. And so for the planning supports, again, those are the only services that will be allowable in this section and the only ones that can be selected. The plan developer service coordinator remaining section will automatically populate when services are entered in. And then if it's over budget, that remaining section, and you can see in this bottom example here, where we've put this over budget, that will be highlighted yellow. And then there will be a red prompt that will appear at the bottom of the section that says services over budget, bring services within assigned budget. So that will just be a prompt to indicate to plan developers that this is over budget and that there needs to be a correction to bring that amount within the assigned budget. So now we'll move on to the residential support section. So for the residential support section, only certified family home or supported living services are going to be allowable in this section. The residential supports remaining field will automatically populate with the amount of budget remaining. And if it's over budget, that field, like you can see in this bottom example, will highlight yellow to show that that is over budget. And then there will be the alert down at the bottom that says services over budget, budget modification required, or additional supported living can be requested with discretionary funds. So that gives a prompt to plan developers to let them know that it is over budget. And then participants have a choice at that point on whether they can, if they have a health or safety reason that they need that service, they can absolutely submit a budget modification for those residential supports. If they don't, or if they, for some reason, do not want to do that, they can request additional supported living with their discretionary funds as well. And then the totals, again, on this one will automatically populate, showing what the total of those services is. And one thing that I forgot to mention earlier that I'll mention now, with the examples in this costing sheet, the rates and the budget amounts that have been entered in here are not actual numbers. These are just examples to show the functionality of the costing sheet at this point. Since we don't have those super finalized rates and budget amounts, those have not been put into examples yet. But before releasing this, all of the correct budgets and rate amounts will be entered into the cost sheet. So let's go ahead and move on to the discretionary support section. So this section will have all of the discretionary supports that are available. It will include supplemental supported living for both individual and group that they can select. And then just like those other sections, the discretionary supports remaining will automatically populate. If it's over budget, just like in the other section, that discretionary supports remaining is going to highlight yellow, and then plan developers will get the alert that says services over budget, budget modification required. One thing to note on these is that if the discretionary supports is over budget, any supplemental supported living needs to be moved to the residential supports. And then they can still request budget modification for that in the residential section, but it needs to be up in the residential and not down in the discretionary if they're requesting a budget modification for discretionary services. And then the next section on the costing is for the health, safety, and employment supports. And so this section, the services that will be available in that dropdown, will only include those services that have been determined to be health, safety, or employment. So for example, we'll have community supported employment, nursing, and those services. For more information on those services, we talked about that in part 1 of the training. It will also be in chapter 8 of the manual once that is on our external website. And so anytime any service is entered into this section, because there's not a budget amount for these services, a red alert will appear, just reminding the plan developer that supporting documentation is required. And again, the first training or chapter 8 of the manual will contain all of the requirements that need to be submitted to receive those services. And then at the end of the cost sheet, we have an overall plan total, and that is going to automatically populate based on all of the information above. And then there's a section below that for the care manager to sign when they're approving the plan. And then we do have a section in this fiscal plan summary on the left-hand side regarding the ARP budget. And so plan developers will type in the ARP budget amount. And then, and we've got 2 examples of this. In this first example, I'm showing an example where the plan is lower or equal to the ARP budget. And so this alert will show that says the plan total is lower than or equal to the ARP budget. And then it will ask, would you like to use your ARP budget instead of submitting a budget modification request for services that are over your advisory budget? And so then they can answer, and it will be a drop-down menu that they can select yes, no, or NA. And then over on the right-hand side is the fiscal plan summary. And that section is a breakdown of all of the plan costs and what is being spent in each budget category. So just to briefly go over those, we have the overall plan total, we have the residential services that have been authorized, any discretionary supported living total, residential services budget modification, discretionary services authorized, discretionary services within budget. We do have a discretionary services out of residential budget, and on the on this cost sheet that does not apply. On the supported living level M and B, that does come into play, and so this will not say does not apply only on that cost sheet. And then we have a discretionary services budget modification section, and then a total for health, safety, and employment. And so this information, you won't have to total or anything. It's going to automatically calculate, and that is just to help the department to be able to evaluate the new model. And then quickly, a couple of differences on the supported living M&B costing, because they are largely the same with just a couple of differences. So we're just going to point out the other differences. The big difference is that unused residential dollars can be carried over to purchase discretionary services for supported living level M&B. And that amount will be limited to the total value of the discretionary budget for supported living level 3. And so the costing page will automatically populate the discretionary supports budget with the remaining residential available to purchase discretionary. And then those both can be used to purchase additional discretionary supports. So I'll show you in this example. And again, these are just numbers that have been filled in to show the functionality of this sheet. Before it's released, it will have accurate rates and budget amounts. So in this example, this participant who is supported living level M&B has chosen to only receive supporting living level 1. And so because of that, they have a residential supports remaining of a little over $99,000. So if you come down to the discretionary supports, and it has the discretionary supports budget, and then below that, the remaining residential available to purchase discretionary. And notice the amount that carried over is not that full $99,000 amount, but it's a smaller amount of say 22,000. This is, again, just a number that's been filled in. The actual amounts will be filled in when we release the final version of the cost sheet. And so that's the big difference. And then the remaining funds available to purchase discretionary supports will be very similar to the residential supports remaining, or the discretionary supports on the other one. It's a combination of both the discretionary and any remaining residential that's left over. So with that, I know we went through that costing page really fast. Are there any questions? And if it's a hard question to type into the chat, you can also raise your hands to ask questions as well.
So Andrea, this is Michael. I'm going to go back here because I have one that came through the chat to me privately, asking when will the rules be posted so providers can start developing policies and procedures and other forms to comply with the new standards. So as we've indicated before, while we are anticipating our implementation date of June 1st, we are still waiting for CMS's final approval on our plans. And so we don't want to have rules go forward that we're going to have to pull back if we need to make any kind of substantial change to it based on CMS's input. And so that's kind of the delay right now in where those rules are. The rules have been sent, the draft rules have been sent to ARU for publication, but we haven't set or announced a publication date as of this time, as we are waiting for CMS approval. As soon as we know that, we will push that out. And then Andrea, are you able to see the chat, or would you like me to read the questions out to you?
If you could read those out, that would be great.
I can do that. So where does the SIS-A units go on the plan?
So I'm not understanding that question. We
Might
don't.
need some clarification there. If that means, and if we can have that, person either provide additional clarification on the question, or if you would like us to unmute you, so please raise your hand and we can do that. While we're waiting for a response there, let's go to the next one that came through. Is, do annualized units give participants more flexibility in their services, or will they be boxed into a certain amount of units per week if written that way? And we also have Karen in here, Andrea, if you want some, if we would like to talk this through a little bit. So the idea, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to answer, I mean, I can answer that probably in part, but the participant has the option, I can speak to the costing page, they can enter those services how they would like to, and there is that flexibility. And in the part 1 training that Alina went through, she went over some of that, where they can choose a combination of both per diem and per unit, particularly for like supported living. There are options for them to have that increased flexibility, to where, you know, maybe some days they are getting a per diem, maybe some days they're doing stuff per unit. So there is some of that flexibility. And I don't know if Alina wants to add anything, or if anyone else has anything to add.
Nope, I think you covered that well. Then the next question states, I may have misunderstood, but was it stated that TSCs have to make sure DDAs have a referral for their services? If so, what is the process?
So for that, I think she's talking about on the questionnaire that Danae went over, where there is a section that asks them to check to verify that the DDA has received a referral, because, and this is true with our current DDA services as well, that developmental therapy does have to be referred by a physician. So while we are not, looking at like a medical care form or anything like that, we are asking that they are verifying that the DDA has said that they have that referral.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat at the moment, and I'm not seeing any raised hands. So again, remember, you can enter your questions into the chat, but you may also raise your hand so that we can unmute and you can ask your question verbally.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to, we're going to briefly go over implementation plans and status reviews. So implementation plans are not required for providers of specialized medical equipment, home delivered meals, environmental accessibility adaptations, non-medical transportation, PERS, respite care, chore services, community crisis support, or adult DD service coordination. All other service providers are required to develop implementation plans within 14 days of receipt of the authorized plan of service or the start date, whichever is later. And those implementation plans are not required to be submitted with plans or addendums, and they do not require an addendum to be submitted or submitted to be updated. And then status reviews, all providers who are required to complete implementation plans must also report the participant's progress towards goals to the plan monitor. The status reviews are submitted to the service coordinator semi-annually and at the annual person-centered planning meeting. And those should include the status of supports and services to identify progress, maintenance, or the delay or prevention of regression. Semi-annual status reviews must be submitted to the plan monitor for review no later than 15 calendar days from the 6-month date. And service providers should be prepared to discuss the semi-annual review and any information regarding progress made, maintenance, or the delay or prevention of regression on goals at any person-centered planning meeting. And then annual status reviews must be submitted to the plan monitor no later than 30 calendar days from the end date of the plan. And I'll pause real quick just to see if there's any questions on that before we jump into addendums.
Yeah, and Andrea, we have a hand raised.
Okay.
And so, Deb, could you please unmute Jenny's line?
I'm sorry, who was it you wanted unmuted?
Jenny, Jenni.
Jenni, there we go.
Thank you. And Jenny, you can ask your question, please.
Yes, so we've been told, TSC has been told that we are going to get 4 hours to do a CIS-A. And I'm just wondering where we put that on the plan, because under TSC, it only has plan development and just the TSC units, the 18 units.
Okay. And so that is something I think that we probably need to do a little finalization on and provide some additional information on. And I'm glad you brought that up. So we will take that back and make sure that we get information out to show exactly where that should go for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. And then let's see. I was there. So so there's a couple questions on, again, on the physician's referral. So the affirmation of the physician's referral is based on verbal indication from the DDA. And then the other one was just to clarify, we're not responsible for actually making sure the DDA that we see the DDA referral for services, but rather we ask if they have one and record their answer.
And I believe that that is correct. My understanding is that that is something that when QA is going out to these providers, that is something that they're verifying, that they do have that referral, because it is a requirement in IDAPA that they have that referral. So I believe that that is correct. Is there anyone that has anything to add to that?
IDAPA says specifically that the history and physical must include a physician's referral for nursing services or developmental disability services. So whether that's on the medical care form or on the history or physical, the DDA and the plan developer should be verifying that that's there, and that's what we're asking them to indicate on that questionnaire, that they verified that service is referred. So it's not any different than the referral requirement that we have today. It's in current IDAPA that is required to be on the history and physical if we're providing that service.
And I'm not seeing any additional questions or hands at this time.
Okay, we'll go ahead and jump into the addendums then. So addendums must be submitted when any changes to a change in the provider, a change in the cost of the plan, services are being added or being removed from the plan. A certified family home alone change request should be submitted instead of an addendum if a participant wants to add or increase alone time in a certified family home where they already reside, and that's the only change that they're making. A new mid-year plan will need to be submitted for any changes in the participant's service mix or support level. So addendums will be limited to changes for services that fall within the participant's current service mix or support level. In addition, new questionnaires must be submitted with the addendum for any services that require a provider implementation plan. So all of those services that have questionnaires. So that includes certified family home, supported living, developmental therapy, adult day health, pre-vocational services, career planning, supported employment, nursing services, behavior consultation and crisis management, and community habilitation. The addendum worksheet is going to be similar to the costing page. It's a Microsoft Excel document. It is locked to protect all of the formulas. The formulas in the worksheet are automatically going to calculate the new budget category and new plan totals and a new fiscal plan summary as well. Other worksheet features, it's still going to have that drop down just like the cost page where you can select services and it will automatically put in the correct procedure codes and then the rates for the services that have a set rate. There will be alerts that will appear if a plan is over budget. There is a separate addendum worksheet to be used for supported living level M&B plans. Again, just due to those different procedures on how those budgets can be used for the supported living level M&B service mix and level. And so I'm going to go ahead and skip to our example to show the header and different information on the addendum worksheet. It does look similar to how the costing sheet looks. We start with, on the left-hand side, the adult's name, Medicaid ID number, the plan developer's name, and then on the right-hand side, the plan start and end date, and those need to match what is on the costing page for the main plan. And then the service mix and level that also needs to match what was on the main plan and what is on the eligibility letter. And then the reason for addendum, that section is to put what changes are going to be made to the plan. Those explanations are there to help the care manager as well, just to understand what change is being made. And then the plan developer is going to need to input the budget amounts and then the previous totals. And so those are outlined in red on the slide. So the plan developer will input the plan development and service coordination budget and the previous plan development service coordination total. The previous remaining amount will automatically populate. And then the same thing for residential. They'll enter in the residential budget and then the previous residential total. And then for discretionary, the same thing, they'll enter in the discretionary budget and then the discretionary supports total. The amounts remaining will automatically populate. And then further down on the costing page, plan developers will need to enter in the previous health, safety, and employment total. And then down at the bottom on the previous fiscal plan summary, the plan developer will need to enter in those totals from the plan, or if there have been previous addendums, from the most recent addendum. And I'll show you where those are at, where the new totals will be when we finish the addendum. One thing to note on this is that even if a change is only being made to one section, so for example, maybe the addendum is just to make a change to plan development or to service coordination, all of the totals still need to be entered in for all of the other sections, even though there's not going to be a change in that section. Otherwise, the plan totals will not come out correctly. Entering changes into the addendum, we'll go over that and then I'll show several examples. So the service column will be the same as the cost sheet. There'll be drop-down menus with only the service options that are allowable for each section. The procedure code will automatically populate. The plan developer will need to type in the provider name as it appears in Gainwell and how it appears on the ISP questionnaire as well. And then the start date for the selected service and end date. And those are the same way that we do them on current addendums. But I am going to go ahead and go over that just to make sure that this is clear. So for services that are being added, or if they're being modified in any way, then the start date is the date that the change will take effect. And then for services that are being discontinued, you can just leave the start date blank. And then ending services, for services that are being added or modified, the end date is going to be the last day of the plan. And then for services that are being discontinued, the end date is the last day that the services will be accessed. And then for the unit section, the number of units that are being added, removed, or modified. So for services that are being added or increased, that units is going to be a positive number. But if you're removing or if you're decreasing units, then that units number needs to be a negative number. And then the frequency also needs to be entered in, just like on our current addendum worksheet. And the frequency should always be a positive number. And it will be just that frequency, either days, weeks, or months. And then the rate will automatically populate for all those services that have a fixed rate. And again, just like on the costing sheet, we cannot lock this field because we do have a couple of services that need to be entered manually. So for those sections that we can't lock, if you need to, you can type in that manual price. And then the annual cost and annual units will automatically populate. So here we have several examples, and I'm going to go over a few of them. I'm not going to go over every example because I want to make sure that there's plenty of time if there are questions, but these are here as a resource on the slides just to show how some of these would be done. So in this example, we are discontinuing ABC service coordination and then adding EFG service coordination. So if you can see when you look down at the example, that for ABC service coordination, they have an end date of 8/31/22. So that would be the last day that they access the service from that provider. The units is negative because it's being removed. That frequency is a positive number. And then the rate has automatically filled in along with the annual cost and the annual units. And then they're adding EFG service coordination. So you can see the start date is the day after that end date, so 9/1/22. And then the end date is 5/31/23, which would be the last day of the plan. So they're adding units, so that's a positive number, 18 units for a frequency of 9, so for 9 months. And then that rate automatically populates along with the annual costs and the annual units. And so then down at the bottom of this section, the change in amounts is 0, and that's going to show we have that in 2 places, and those numbers are going to always be the same, but it's going to have the amount of change, and then the new amount remaining will automatically populate along with the new plan development service coordination total. So another example of this here in the residential section. In this section, they are removing a supported living level 2 per diem amount and switching over to some individual units. So we again have that end date. That would be the last date that they're providing services. It's a -1 because they are removing that amount and the frequency, the number of days. And again, that rate, annual cost, and annual units will automatically populate. And then they're adding in the individual. And so the start date is that day after 9/1/22 with an end date, the last day of the plan, 5/31/23. And then they're adding units. So these are all positive numbers, and they're adding 160 units at, it looks like weekly. So 39 is the frequency and the rate. Annual cost and annual units will all automatically calculate. So on this one, you can see, because there was a change in cost, you can see the amount of change in the residential supports. So this one went down by $23,765.82. So you can see that in both of those sections. And then we have a new residential supports remaining amount of $23,765.82. And then we have a new residential supports total as well. So then we have some examples here in the discretionary as well. These work exactly the same way, where adding and removing services, and then we have the amount of change, and then the new total, and then with the discretionary supports, the change in the new total as well. And then for health, safety, and employment, so in this example, they are removing 4 units of supported employment. So they have that -4 because they're removing. And then this is going to calculate automatically the health, safety, and employment, the change in that cost, and then the new health, safety, and employment total. Now you'll notice on this that the supporting documentation required banner is going to show up on these. And in all sections, if the plan or if the section is over budget, those alerts are going to appear. And so if a service is being added, then they are going to need to submit that additional documentation or budget modification. But like in an example here where we are just reducing what has already been approved, that supporting documentation would not be required. So if there's any questions that come up on if on an addendum, if supported documentation or budget modification need to be submitted, you can always reach out to your care manager regarding that. And then the overall plan change will automatically populate, and then a new overall plan total will automatically populate as well. And then on this addendum worksheet, there will be a signature field for the participant, and then the guardian if they have one to sign, and then also the plan coordinator or plan developer or service coordinator to sign as well. And then there's a section for the care manager to sign when they're approving the addendum. And then moving on to the fiscal plan summary. I showed you previously on the right-hand side where you're going to enter in that previous fiscal plan summary information from the most recent plan or addendum. And then for the ARP budget, this one, we have an example where the plan is over what that ARP budget would be. So the plan developer will type in that ARP budget. And then in this one, the alert says the plan total exceeds the ARP budget. And then it will give the question, the budget modification request required for services over your advisory budget. Has a budget modification request been submitted with the plan? And then there's a drop down still in this section that says yes, no, or NA for you to answer that question. And then the new fiscal plan summary will all automatically populate. So on the left-hand side, it has the amount of change in all of those categories that we talked about earlier. And then the box in red, that is the new plan summary. So this is the section that if we have a plan that has multiple addendums, this is the section from the addendum that you would copy onto the next addendum into that previous amount. There's a couple of additional considerations with addendums, and then we'll open it up to questions. So again, addendums that are over budget or requesting health, safety, or employment supports will show the same prompts as the costing page for each section. So they will be required for any addendums that are either adding or changing services that are over budget, but they won't be required if the only change is to decrease from what was requested previously. And then if a participant is requesting a budget modification for discretionary supports, any previously requested supported living must be removed through the discretionary supports and requested through the residential supports. And then they can, of course, they can always request budget modification under the residential supports if needed and if they meet those qualifications. So let's see if there's any questions at this point. And if you need to, you can also raise your hand.
We've had a couple come through.
Okay.
For mid-year plans, if a participant is moving from a state plan to DD, will that change the original redet, or does the mid-year plan make it so they keep their redet dates?
So the mid-year plan makes it so that they keep their redet dates. So for example, if somebody was to have their original plan dates were from January 1st through December 31st, and maybe they make that change halfway through the year, that mid-year plan would go from maybe July 1st, but then that same end date would apply. So they still have those same redet dates.
Okay. We did have a question. What is Gainwell and how would a TSC know how names appear there?
So Gainwell is the system that providers use for billing. That's who they how they're able to bill Medicaid. And so providers should be able to provide that information. And especially when they're doing that questionnaire, they should be able to provide that information for how their name appears. We just want to make sure that that name is accurate because sometimes we do have agencies who maybe have names that are a little bit similar. We want to make sure that when people are going into prior authorize those and put those units into the system, that we are getting those to the correct provider.
And then the final question that's been entered at this point are, do providers also need to sign each new questionnaire with addendums?
Yes.
I am not seeing any other questions or hands at this time.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. The next section that we're going to go over is the Certified Family Home Alone Time Change form. And this is one where we have slides that have detailed instructions, but I am going to go ahead and skip to the example to go over what those instructions are. It has a header just like the plan. So you'll need to enter the participant name, their Medicaid ID number, and their plan date, their plan start date. And then the first section of the form is for participant and guardian contact information. So you'll need to enter in the participant's name and phone number, their email, and their mailing address. And then the guardian's name, email, if they have it, and mailing address as well. And then there's a section for the support broker or plan developer contact information. This form was developed for both traditional and self-direct certified family homes. So you'll notice that the references are for either or, since we are specifically directing this towards traditional service coordinators. That's who this would apply to at this time. So you would enter in the plan developer's name, their phone number, their email, and mailing address. And then for the alone time in a certified family home, all of these questions will need to be answered. The first question is, has the participant utilized alone time in the past? So that would be answered yes or no. And if that answer is yes, then the follow-up question needs to be answered. If yes, describe how much and for how long. And if it was discontinued, explain why. And so in this example, it says that John currently has 1 hour a day of alone time at home. And then the next question, does the participant or guardian want to utilize alone time now? Yes or no. And we would anticipate if they are submitting this form that they are wanting to access alone time. So they will describe the volume of alone time requested, where and when the alone time will take place. So in this example, John has done well with 1 hour of alone time at home and would like to increase to 2 hours per day with time both at home and in the community. So then the next question that needs to be answered, describe the risk and or safety concerns when the participant is alone. Identify what measures are in place to minimize the risk, and backup plans and strategies as needed. And then, so the example for this one, John is very trusting of strangers and could be vulnerable to financial exploitation by others. The certified family home will discuss safety skills before community alone time activities, and John will only take enough money into the community to pay for his own activities. And so those are the only questions that need to be answered on this. And then there is a section for signatures, so the participant and then the guardian, if they have one, needs to sign. And then there's a section for the service coordinator that they also need to sign. And then when care managers have reviewed and when they're approving these, the care manager would sign that section. And then those can be distributed from there. And then I'm going to go ahead and go over this last section about appeals, and then we can open it up for final questions. We're just going to briefly do a quick overview about appeals. Participants have the right to appeal program eligibility determinations, the results of program assessments, support level assignments, verification review decisions, their assigned budget, the outcome of budget modification requests, the outcome of a service mix change or a change in condition request, and any authorizations for services. So if a participant disagrees with a decision that's made by DHW, they must request a hearing within 28 days from when that notice was mailed. And requests for appeals must be in writing. And so they can either do that on the BDDS appeals request form that's attached to all notices of action, or they can write a letter requesting an appeal. Participants also have a right to withdraw their request for an appeal at any time. And further details on submitting an appeal are included on all of the notices. So with that, I think we can open it up for any further questions. Feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or type it into the chat box if you'd prefer.
You have one that's come through the chat. Will we have to provide CFH certificates for plans or addendums?
No, we are not. Those are verified when they sign up through through Gainwell as a certified family home provider. So we're not requiring that those certificates be submitted. We will need, just the same as how we do certified family home now, that's not changing. We do need that verification that they are enrolled through Gainwell before we can add certified family home services.
No additional questions or hands at the moment.
Andrea, I had a question come directly to me a little bit ago, and it is regarding services such as pre-vocational services, career planning, and community hub. Are there agencies to provide this now, or will these be brand new services? And I think the basic answer to that question is these are brand new services. Alina is doing trainings on, and the first part of this training goes over those in detail. So if you've missed that, please go to the My Choice Matters website and check that out, because it goes over those services in details, what they offer, and it's really beneficial.
I'll just add in that while those are new services, they are services that are for approved provider types already. So providers who are approved to provide residential habilitation or supported living services, or those DDA providers, are able to provide the community habilitation service just by signing up for that service. And providers who are currently authorized to provide the employment services are allowed to also provide that career planning or pre-vocational services. So that provider network and base is really prepared and ready to be able to take on those additional services by having the same qualifications for those services.
And I'm seeing no additional questions at this time.
Okay. If there's no additional questions, I think we can go ahead and end this meeting and give you guys back a little bit of time in your day.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Danae and Andrea.